funny because I always thought that I would get more nervous around people I didn't know.
I'm just trying to hoitle her eye. I'm just trying to make sure I get everything in the shot. So, I went to the store today and you won't believe what happened. I ran into Sarah from high school.
Oh, really?
Hello, can you hear me? I'm on my way now.
Today I'm going to cook a very simple dish. It's potatoes with some vegetables.
The late afternoon sun slanted across the narrow country road, casting long shadows that danced over the uneven dirt path as Tieu Ca guided the old motorbike slowly forward, one hand steady on the handlebar, the other occasionally glancing over to the young woman seated behind him, her arms wrapped protectively around the tiny bundle nestled in her embrace. The baby, only a few days old, was sleeping soundly, unaware of the swirling mix of exhaustion, relief, and unspoken emotions that enveloped the adults. They had just left the small rural clinic where the girl had given birth, and the air carried the faint scent of antiseptic and warm earth. Tieu Ca's voice, calm but tinged with a kind of quiet determination, broke the hum of the motorbike's engine as he said, "Why don't you and the baby stay at my place for a few days? You need time to regain your strength, and it'll be easier for me to help you there." She looked down at the baby's tiny fingers, barely the size of matchsticks, and hesitated, torn between the instinct to manage on her own and the strange, unexpected comfort his offer gave her. He didn't press her for an answer immediately. Instead, he asked gently about her older daughter, Lythihuong. "I'll go bring her home soon," he promised, glancing at her through the mirror. She should be with her mother. The girl's expression softened when she spoke of the child, her voice holding both love and a subtle thread of guilt for being away from her these past days. Then, as if unable to stop herself, she shared a piece of her own history, a truth that still sat heavily in her heart. From the moment she could remember, she had never known her parents, growing up in a patchwork of care from distant relatives and moments of loneliness too vast to put into words. Tieu Ca didn't comment right away. Instead, he nodded slowly, his mind turning over the thought, feeling a pang for the girl and the life she had endured. The road bent toward the small village where his home stood, a modest two-story structure with fading paint, but an unmistakable sense of order and care in its surroundings. As they arrived, he parked and moved quickly to help her down, making sure she and the baby were steady before guiding them inside. The air was cooler indoors, the faint hum of an old air conditioner kicking in as he set about creating a space for them. He moved through the rooms with quiet efficiency, filling a kettle to warm water, preparing a bottle for the baby. Soon, the soft sound of milk trickling into the bottle filled the silence, and he handed it to her. The baby stirred, let out a tiny whimper, and then began to feed, each small swallow pulling a faint smile from the girl's tired face. While she tended to the baby, Tieu Ca turned to the kitchen. His movements there were purposeful, almost tender, as he sliced the bright orange flesh of ripe papaya, set it into a pot with pork ribs, and began to simmer a fragrant soup. Something nourishing, warm, and gentle enough for her recovery. The steam rose, carrying the scent of home-cooked comfort through the air. He glanced over his shoulder once or twice, noting how the soft light fell on her as she sat by the bed, rocking the baby, her hair falling loose over her shoulder in a way that made her seem both fragile and unyieldingly strong. "It's ready," he said after a while, setting the bowl before her, along with a cup of freshly made fruit juice, its color vivid and inviting. She ate slowly, almost shyly, as though unaccustomed to such care. Between spoonfuls, she thanked him in a voice so it was almost lost under the clink of the spoon. "You should rest after this," he told her, his tone carrying no room for argument. "Take the baby into the room with the air conditioner. I'll head out to pick up Tieu Ca and get new bedding for all of you." She opened her mouth to protest, but he shook his head lightly. "You've done enough these past days. Let me handle this." Before leaving, he made sure the baby was settled, the room neat, and the window shades drawn to keep out the harsh light. He stepped out into the sunlight once again, his mind already running through the list of things to buy. The small town market was alive with its usual chorus. Vendors calling out their prices, the clatter of baskets, the sharp scent of fresh-cut herbs mingling with the heavier aroma of grilled meat. He made his purchases quickly, imagining how the crisp new sheets and blankets would feel against their skin after the sterile chill of the clinic. But the most important errand awaited him, bringing Tieu Ca home. When he arrived at the neighbor's house where the little girl had been staying, she was in the yard, crouched over a cluster of wildflowers, her small hands tracing their petals. At the sight of him, her eyes lit up with recognition, but there was also a flicker of uncertainty. Change was coming, and children, more than anyone, sensed it. "Come on, Han," he said softly. "Let's go home to your mom." The walk back was filled with her curious questions about the baby, her voice bouncing between excitement and hesitation. By the time they reached the house, the aroma of dinner had already begun to fill the air. The young woman, her mother, was in the kitchen, having insisted on preparing the meal despite his earlier protests. The table soon held simple dishes, their colors bright against the plain ceramic plates, and they sat together, a patchwork of quiet moments and gentle conversation weaving itself between bites. Tieu Ca studied the baby with wide eyes, a subtle frown forming when her mother's arm stayed wrapped around the tiny newcomer for a little too long. Tieu Ca noticed the shadow of jealousy and leaned forward, telling a funny story about Han when she was a toddler, earning a shy laugh from the child and easing the tension just enough. Later, when the dishes were washed and the rooms quieted, the three of them sat for a while in the glow of a single lamp, the baby sleeping in her mother's arms, Han leaning against Tieu Ca's side, and the air between them settling into a rhythm that felt almost like family. Outside, the night deepened, the chorus of crickets filling the spaces between their words, and though none of them said it out loud, each felt in their own way that this day, this quiet, unassuming day, had shifted something fundamental in their lives. The next morning arrived not with the rush of an alarm or the clang of city life, but with the soft light of dawn slipping through the thin curtains, casting pale golden stripes across the small bedroom where the young woman lay curled protectively around her newborn. The air was cool, scented faintly of the papaya soup that had been simmered the night before, a fragrance now mingling with the clean cotton of the fresh bed sheets that Tieu Ca had bought. He had risen before sunrise, the quiet creak of floorboards marking his movements as he stepped into the kitchen to prepare breakfast before anyone else stirred. The knife moved rhythmically against the cutting board, slicing through soft tofu and crisp green vegetables, the sound a steady accompaniment to his thoughts. Outside, the yard lay still except for the occasional rustle of leaves as the early breeze drifted through. In the other room, Tieu Ca sat sleepily on the edge of the bed she'd been given, rubbing her eyes with small fists, trying to make sense of the changes around her. She padded barefoot to the kitchen, drawn by the sound of someone moving about. Tieu Ca turned and smiled when he saw her, handing her a small cup of warm milk. "Drink this before it gets cold," he said, his tone gentle but carrying the ease of someone who had already decided to take responsibility for her comfort. She sipped it slowly, her eyes never leaving him, as though trying to gauge what kind of man this was who had stepped so suddenly into her world. Her mother emerged moments later, her hair still slightly damp from a hurried wash, the baby in her arms wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked better than she had the day before, less pale, more grounded, but there was still a trace of wariness in her gaze, the kind of guardedness born from too many years of having to manage on her own. "Sit," Tieu Ca said simply, setting a bowl in front of her, steam curling upward in fragrant spirals. "Eat while it's hot. You need the strength." She hesitated, almost embarrassed by his attentiveness, but obeyed without argument. Between mouthfuls, they spoke of practical things, the supplies they might need for the baby, the errands that could wait versus those that could not. Tieu Ca made mental notes of each, his mind moving ahead to how he might arrange his day around them. Han sat quietly beside her mother, still studying the infant with a mix of curiosity and something less easily named. Sensing the tension, Tieu Ca reached for a photo album from a shelf in the corner and began flipping through its worn pages, pointing out pictures of Han as a baby, most of them given to him by her mother in earlier years. The little girl leaned closer despite herself, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips when he recounted a story of her first clumsy attempts to walk, how she had toppled into a pile of laundry and somehow emerged wearing a sock on her head like a crown. The memory drew a laugh from her mother, soft and genuine, and for a brief moment, the air between them felt lighter. Later, after breakfast had been cleared away, Tieu Ca announced that he was going to the market again, this time to pick up a few more essentials, a sturdier crib for the baby, a mosquito net, and perhaps some soft toys for Han. "You two should rest," he said firmly, cutting off the young woman's automatic offer to accompany him. "I'll be quicker alone." She didn't argue this time, only watched him go, her eyes following him until the door shut. The market was busier than the day before, its narrow lanes packed with shoppers haggling over prices, the air thick with competing aromas, sweet ripe mangoes, the sharp tang of fresh fish, the earthy musk of root vegetables pulled straight from the soil. Tieu Ca navigated it with practiced ease, stopping at a carpenter's stall to select a small crib made from smooth bamboo. Its craftsmanship, simple but sturdy. He chose a delicate white net to drape over it, imagining the baby sleeping safely within, free from the buzzing of mosquitoes. At a toy vendor's stand, he picked out a small stuffed rabbit, its ears comically long, thinking it might serve as a bridge between Han and the new baby, a token of inclusion rather than replacement. On his way back, he stopped by a hardware shop to ask about having sand delivered for the yard. He explained to the shop owner how the uneven ground outside collected rainwater and turned to mud, making it difficult for the children to play. The owner agreed to send a truck later that week. By the time he returned home, the sun was high, and the air hummed with the steady drone of cicadas. Inside, he found Han sprawled on the floor beside her baby sibling, the two of them under her mother's watchful eye. Han was showing the baby a brightly colored picture book, though the infant's eyes were still too unfocused to follow. "Look what I found for you," Tieu Ca said, holding out the stuffed rabbit. Han took it, her eyes lighting briefly before she remembered to keep her expression guarded. "It's for you to share with the baby," he added. That earned a faint nod. The afternoon passed in a slow rhythm. Tieu Ca assembled the crib in the corner of the bedroom, his hands working steadily as the smell of simmering rice drifted from the kitchen where the young woman was preparing the evening meal. Han hovered nearby, offering the occasional screw or piece of bamboo when asked, clearly enjoying the sense of being part of something. When the crib was finally set in place, the young woman ran her fingers over its smooth edges, her lips curving into a smile she didn't try to hide. Dinner that evening was a more relaxed affair than the night before. Han seemed less tense, even offering to hold the baby for a few minutes while her mother ate. Tieu Ca watched quietly, noting the way the girl's arms trembled at first before finding a steady grip. "You're a natural," he said, and the small burst of pride in her face was worth the words. After the dishes were cleared, they sat outside on the porch, the air cooling as the day slipped into twilight. Fireflies began to flicker in the garden, their lights winking in and out like tiny living lanterns. Han chased them for a while, her laughter carrying into the night. While inside the house, the baby slept soundly in the new crib. The young woman sat beside Tieu Ca, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and for a long time they didn't speak, content to listen to the symphony of crickets and distant night birds. Eventually, she broke the silence. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly. "I don't want to be a burden." He turned to her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You're not a burden," he said simply. "Family takes care of each other, even when they're not, by blood." She lowered her gaze, her fingers twisting in the edge of the blanket, unsure how to answer that. They stayed there until Han returned, breathless from her firefly chase, and the three of them went inside. Later, when the house was dark and quiet, Tieu Ca lay awake, listening to the soft sounds of the baby's breathing, the occasional rustle from Han's room. Something achieved an imi, the santomasiktan sanchipam the past 2 days, something he couldn't quite name but felt deeply. It wasn't just about offering a place to stay. It was about building a life, however tentative, around these moments of shared care and trust. He knew the road ahead would be complicated. There were unspoken histories, unanswered questions, and the unpredictable tides of life. But for now, in this small house on the edge of the village, it felt as though they had taken the first step toward something neither of them had dared hope for. The morning after that peaceful evening began deceptively calm, with the kind of still air that makes the world feel suspended between one moment and the next. A thin mist clung to the edges of the yard, softening the outlines of the bamboo fence and the low hills beyond. Inside, the house stirred slowly to life, the baby waking first, her small cries breaking the quiet, followed by the shuffle of Han's feet against the cool floorboards as she made her way sleepily into her mother's room. Tieu Ca had already been up for hours, his hands smelling faintly of wet earth from tending to the small patch of vegetables behind the house. He had watered the beans and pulled weeds from around the papaya tree, the repetitive motions grounding him as his thoughts roamed ahead to the errands he needed to run. But when he stepped inside, carrying a basket of fresh greens, he noticed something in the young woman's face that stopped him. There was a tightness around her mouth, a lingering shadow in her eyes, as though she'd been awake for much longer than she should have been. "Didn't you sleep?" he asked, setting the basket down. She shook her head. The baby was restless, and she hesitated, glancing toward Han, who was crouched on the floor arranging her small collection of toys, oblivious for the moment. "I had a strange dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream." He raised an eyebrow. "Go on." She explained that she'd woken in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps outside the window. Slow, deliberate, pausing now and then as if someone was listening. She'd frozen, clutching the baby to her chest, straining to hear. After a few minutes, the sound had faded, but she had been unable to fall back asleep, her mind replaying every possible reason why someone might be there. Tieu Ca's expression darkened. He didn't dismiss it as imagination. Life had taught him that danger often came quietly, without warning. "You should have woken me," he said, his tone sharper than he intended. She met his gaze steadily. "And what would you have done? Go outside and risk leaving us alone inside?" Her words were logical, but the unease in her voice betrayed her. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders obvious. "From tonight, I'll set up a light outside and keep the dog in the yard. If someone comes near, we'll know." She nodded, but didn't look reassured. The day unfolded in its usual pattern, but the air between them was different, charged with the unspoken awareness of that shadow in the night. Tieu Ca took Han with him when he went to the market, partly to give the young woman a chance to rest, and partly to keep the child close. Han chattered about school and asked if they could buy more coloring pencils, her small voice breaking through his preoccupation. He bought them without hesitation, tucking them into her bag along with a few sweets. On their way back, they stopped at the carpenter's shop again, this time for a lock sturdy enough to secure the back door. By afternoon, the sun was high and relentless, the heat pressing down like a weight. The baby slept fitfully, waking every hour, while Han sprawled on the floor with her new pencils, coloring in careful strokes. Tieu Ca worked quietly in the corner, reinforcing the door frame and fitting the new lock. Sweat trickled down his back, but he didn't stop until the job was done. Just as he was tightening the final screw, the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached their ears. Han jumped up to look out the window, her curiosity spilling over in a rush of words. "There's a car, a black one!" The young woman joined her, a flicker of recognition passing over her features before she masked it. "Stay inside," Tieu Ca ordered, wiping his hands on a rag as he stepped to the door. The car's engine cut off, and two men stepped out, their clothes neat, but their faces set in hard lines. One of them carried a small folder. The other wore a look of casual arrogance that instantly set Tieu Ca on edge. "We're looking for her," the man with the folder said without preamble, nodding toward the doorway where the young woman now stood, the baby in her arms. "And you are?" Tieu Ca's voice was cool but firm. The man opened the folder and flipped to a page, holding it up. "Debt. Left by her late brother. She's the closest living relative. We've been patient, but now it's time to settle." The young woman's face drained of color. "I told you before, I don't have anything to do with his debts," she said, her voice trembling. The man shrugged. "That's not how it works. The law." "Enough," Tieu Ca cut in, stepping forward until he blocked the doorway completely. "You have no right to threaten her here. If you have something to say, take it to the authorities." The arrogant man smirked. "We could, or we could make things more uncomfortable." His eyes flicked toward Han, who stood frozen just behind her mother. In that moment, the air seemed to crystallize into something sharp. Tieu Ca's jaw tightened. "Leave," he said, his voice low but laced with steel. "Now, before I make you." Something in his tone, or perhaps in the unwavering way he held the man's gaze, made them hesitate. After a moment, the one with the folder muttered something under his breath and turned toward the car. The arrogant one lingered just long enough to smirk again before following. The car rolled away, leaving a trail of dust and an uneasy silence in its wake. Inside, the young woman sank into a chair, her knuckles white where she clutched the baby. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They'll keep coming." Tieu Ca crouched in front of her, his hands steady on her knees. "Then, we'll be ready. You're not alone anymore." For the rest of the afternoon, the house felt different, less like a refuge and more like a place under siege. Tieu Ca made calls to a friend in the nearby town, someone who owed him a favor, asking discreet questions about the men and their supposed claim. He also arranged for a few trusted neighbors to keep an eye on the property. That night, after Han was asleep and the baby finally settled, they sat again on the porch, the stars bright above them. "I don't want to bring trouble here," she said quietly. "You've already done more than I could ask for." "This isn't about what you asked for," he replied. "It's about what I choose to do, and I choose to protect you." She didn't answer, but her hand found his on the bench between them, resting there lightly, almost as if testing whether it was real. The night passed without incident, but neither of them slept deeply, their ears tuned to every small sound. Dawn came, and with it the knowledge that whatever life they were building here was no longer untouched by the outside world. But as Tieu Ca watched Han feed the baby a bottle with careful hands and saw the way the young woman's shoulders eased ever so slightly, he knew one thing with certainty: they were worth the fight.